Hello, fabulous scholars. It is time for another episode of Cooking Up Weather with Ms. Lund. Today, we're going into the eye of the hurricane. Ooh, ooh. Don't be afraid, though, because although I am going to make you a hurricane in my kitchen, you can't really do that in Minnesota. We are missing one of the most crucial ingredients to have a hurricane. So we don't even have to worry about this kind of weather here, which is great because hurricanes are huge and cause lots of damage and destruction and even death. So although I'm going to be making one for you today, I don't really want to ever be near one. So let's get started. A few of the ingredients that we need are, of course, the ocean. That would be why we're never getting one in Minnesota. We are nowhere near the ocean. So you need the ocean, and then you need, yes, the sun. The sun shines on the ocean, especially around the equator where it's got lots of daylight and it's shining straight down on the ocean. And the water gets hotter and hotter and hotter. And do you remember from the water cycle? What happens as the sun's rays and the heat from the sun shine on the water? It starts to what? Right, evaporate. And you get this warm, moist air rising from the ocean. Now, this warm, moist air is a crucial ingredient as well, and you can only get it from the ocean. So even when the sun is shining on, let's say, Lake Superior, you're not going to end up with warm, moist air like you need for a hurricane. So again, no hurricanes in Minnesota. All right, sun is shining on the ocean. We have the warm, moist air rising, and then this is an important part. It needs to cool off. No? No, okay. It does need to cool off. So you've got the warm, moist air rising, and as it rises higher and higher away from the sun shining down on the ocean, it cools off. And you get this cool, dry air, and cool air just kind of floats back down again. But how did it go from moist air, that means it's got a lot of water vapor, to dry air, that means it doesn't have a lot of water vapor? I know, it dropped off the water vapor. And when water vapor cools off and collects together because the warm, moist air doesn't want it anymore, it turns into, I got it. Let me check my pantry. Clouds, right? And so these huge clouds start to form. I'm going to put them in the ocean here. These clouds are forming in the ocean because this warm air is rising. Need another hand. This warm air is rising, and then the cool air is sinking down, and it turns into all these clouds. Now, this is still not a hurricane. What has to happen is the clouds have to start to turn. That cool air is still in the center, and the warm air is still going around the outside, and that causes this tower of clouds to start to turn. Still not a hurricane. It's something called a tropical storm. A tropical storm is like a baby hurricane. It can still cause a lot of damage and bring a lot of severe weather, but it's just a baby. Isn't it cute? It's a cute little tropical storm just swirling there over the ocean. But meteorologists start to watch this because if this tropical storm still has more warm, moist air rising around the outside of it and more cool, dry air falling through the center of it, it's going to get bigger and bigger and bigger and bigger, and the winds are going to get stronger and the clouds are going to get huge. It can be hundreds of miles across. Now this little one in my kitchen, not hundreds of miles across, but it can get to be hundreds of miles across, and more clouds just keep joining into it. And then you have a hurricane. Hurricanes, again, are huge. They're swirling with all this air and all this clouds. And if you look at a hurricane from the top, scholars, it looks like this. And you see these huge arms of clouds just swirling around and around and around. You might be saying, but Ms. Lund, there's a hole in your hurricane. Well, scholars, there's a hole in my tropical storm too, in my hurricane. A hole in the center where that cool air is falling down. It's called the eye. The eye of a hurricane is actually very, very calm. That cool, dry air is just falling down. It's not swirling, it's not being windy, it's just kind of falling through the center. And so around it, the winds are blowing and the clouds are twisting, and you can make tornadoes and other kinds of severe weather, but in the eye, it's very calm. Not much is going on. There's one small problem, though. There's always one small problem in science class. To get to this eye of the hurricane, you have to pass through the edge of it, called the eye wall. And that's where the strongest winds and the worst weather is in a hurricane. It's so condensed in here and it's swirling so fast. This is what causes a lot of damage. You don't ever want to be in the eye of the hurricane, because to get to this calm eye part, you have to pass through the worst winds, the strongest winds. Yeah. And again, remember, it isn't like 8 inches across like in Ms. Lund's kitchen. It can be hundreds of miles, which is why meteorologists watch when that warm, moist air starts to rise from the ocean because the sun was shining on it, and the cool, dry air starts to sink down through the middle of that warm, moist air. They start watching it very carefully. And when it becomes a tropical storm, they give it a name so that people will pay attention to it. And then if it keeps growing and it turns into a hurricane, they tell people, this is where the hurricane is going, it's time to leave. Because even though for a tornado, you get as low as possible and you cover your head and you can stay safe where you are, for a hurricane, they're so big, they can last for weeks. They're so powerful, the only safe thing to do is to leave. Because even after the hurricane comes through, there can still be tornadoes or flooding, or if you're by the ocean, something called a storm surge, which is when huge waves come and crash into the land. It's just not safe. So fabulous scholars, before you go making some hurricanes at home, think carefully. They do have a lot of ingredients, but they're also very deadly. So if you have some ocean water and some sunlight shining on it, and then some warm, moist air starts to rise, and then cools off, and cool, dry air starts to fall down into the center of it, and you start seeing more and more clouds, and they're swirling around and swirling around. Remember, first, it makes a tropical storm. That's kind of like a baby hurricane. But if it keeps growing and the winds keep getting stronger and it keeps getting bigger, and from a satellite, you start to see something like this looking down at the earth, that's a hurricane. Remember that the eye is calm, but to get to the eye, you have to pass through the eye wall where the strongest winds are. And these arms of clouds are just blowing and twisting. Stay away from hurricane, scholars. So on second thought, maybe you shouldn't make this in your kitchen. It's made quite a mess in mine. Next time, we'll have to make something a little safer. All right, scholars, good luck.